Welcome to the third of our regular updates, highlighting what's happening and changing in relation to employment law and practice. In this episode, we will concentrate on the roadmap which has been published by the government. This sets out when it intends to bring into force all the major reforms contained in the Employment Rights Bill, and also what areas it plans to further consult on to help inform the detail and how the reforms will work in practice. Firstly, just a quick update as to where the Employment Rights Bill is. Well, it's still in the House of Lords and hasn't yet returned to the House of Commons. We therefore think it's unlikely that the bill will receive royal assent and become an Act of Parliament now until after the summer recess, possibly in September or October. However, as we mentioned, in anticipation of the bill becoming an Act of Parliament, the government has now set out a detailed roadmap of when many of the major reforms contained within it will come into force. This is an important publication which is well worth looking at in detail because it will arm employers with knowledge as to when the seismic changes to employment law and practice will be coming into force. The first reforms set to come into force are royal assent or soon afterwards. These all relate to trade union law. Further trade union reforms are also set to come into force in April 2026, October 2026, and during 2027. If these reforms affect you, please do pause the video and have a good read. The first major non-trade union reforms are set to come into force in April 2026. These include the removal of the lower earnings limit and the 3-day waiting period in relation to statutory sick pay, paternity leave and unpaid parental leave becoming day one rights, the reporting of sexual harassment becoming a qualifying disclosure in relation to whistleblowing protection, and the doubling of the maximum period of the Collective Redundancy Protection Award. The new Fair Work Agency will also be established at this time. This is planned to bring together existing enforcement functions in relation to certain employment legislation and over time take on enforcement of a wider range of employment rights. Powers to investigate and take action, powers to bring proceedings in the employment tribunal on behalf of a worker, and powers to impose charges to recover enforcement costs from employers against whom enforcement action has been taken for non-compliance are all planned. Then, in October 2026, the following reforms are set to come into force. Employment tribunal time limits to be increased from 3 months to 6 months, the strengthening of employee rights and protection in relation to fire and rehire practices, the strengthening of tipping law to mandate consultation with workers, requiring employers to take all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment, and the introduction of an obligation on employers not to permit the harassment of their employees by third parties. Finally, at some stage or stages during 2027, the remaining reforms will come into force. The big one, the protection from unfair dismissal becoming a day one right. The package of new rights for flexible workers, new rights in relation to 0 hours workers, regulation of umbrella companies, a new right to bereavement leave, enhancing dismissal protections for pregnant women and new mothers, and changing the collective consultation threshold in relation to collective redundancies. For many of the measures, the government will consult on the detail of the policy and how it is implemented. The roadmap sets out when these consultations will take place. The first, this summer-autumn, relates to the most important, that is, making unfair dismissal a day one right. It should be noted that the House of Lords has recently agreed an amendment that the qualifying period reduces to 6 months instead of becoming a day one right. But Given this does not have government support and doesn't reflect the government's manifesto, this amendment is not expected to survive the bill's continued journey through Parliament, and instead, a statutory probation period for a lighter touch dismissal process will remain. In any event, employers will be relieved that this reform is now not expected to come into force until sometime during 2027. The next lot of consultations will follow in the autumn and will be on fire and rehire practices. This will be also a very interesting consultation to see because the government has supported amendments which has softened some of the original proposals. Then there will be consultations on regulation of umbrella companies, bereavement leave, rights of pregnant workers, and new rights in relation to zero-hour contracts. Then, moving into the winter and early next year, there will be consultations on tipping law, collective redundancy, and flexible working. We will be closely tracking further developments, of course, and we'll look into some of the most important changes in more detail in future episodes. But for now, until our next video update, do have a look at our podcast for recent employment law decisions and also our blogs for practical advice and tips. Until then, goodbye.